President,
Senator from Iowa.
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended,
Without objection.
and I ask unanimous consent to speak for 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Okay. The resolution of disapproval that I'm introducing today via the Congressional Review Act repeals a Social Security regulation that unfairly stigmatizes people with disabilities. It also violates the fundamental nature of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment recognizes the God-given right to self-defense. In order to take away that right, the government must have a compelling interest. Furthermore, the law or regulation to achieve that compelling interest must be narrowly tailored. In other words, the government better have one heck of a good reason for going against the Second Amendment. The Justice Department, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Social Security Administration have not protected Second Amendment rights adequately under the previous administration. Our fundamental Second Amendment rights were constantly under attack. For example, hundreds of thousands of veterans have been reported to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System without due process. And of course, that system amounts to a national gun ban list for those reported erroneously. Veterans were reported without first having a neutral authority find them in danger to self or others, and thus having a legitimate right to deny them their Second Amendment rights. According to the government, the veterans needed a fiduciary to manage benefit payments. And that is not a sufficient reason under the law. Needing help with your finances, simply needing that help, should not mean that you have surrendered your fundamental right of self-defense. And it doesn't mean that you're a danger to the public. On May 17, 2016, Senator Durbin and I debated my amendment that would require the Department of Veterans Affairs to first find veterans to be a danger before reporting their name to the gun ban list. During the course of that debate, Senator Durbin admitted that the list was broader than it should have been. Senator Durbin said, quote, "Let me just concede at the outset, reporting 174,000 names goes too far, but eliminating 174 names goes too far." Now, for the record, that's the end of Senator Durbin's quote. For the record, it was 260,381 names from the Veterans Administration that has sent the gun ban list for allegedly being in, quote, mental defective category. Now, it just happens that that was 98 8/10% of all the names in that category. So the Veterans Administration reported more names by far than any other agency. Senator Durbin's staff and mine have met over these issues since that debate. I appreciate and thank Senator Durbin for that outreach, and I want to work together with him to solve these problems for the VA. But now, the Social Security Administration is about to make the same mistake as the Veterans Administration. Now, that is, unless we stop them right here and right now with that resolution of disapproval. And if we don't stop this, it could lead to hundreds of thousands of Social Security recipients being improperly reported to the gun ban list. At its core, Social Security's new regulation allows the agency to report people to the gun ban list if, under two circumstances. First, the beneficiary needs to have someone designated to help manage benefit payments. Sounds like the VA, right? And two, the beneficiary has an affliction based on a broad, quote-unquote, disorders list. But the process for designating someone to help a recipient manage Social Security benefits is not a process that is very objective. But the process for designating someone to help a recipient manage their Social Security benefit should be objective. The former Social Security Administrator and Inspector General said the following last year in testimony about this process that offends us here in the Senate for the reason of this resolution. Quote, "It's not a scientific decision. It's more of a personal opinion," end of quote. The personal opinion of a bureaucrat, then, cannot be the basis for taking away a person's fundamental Second Amendment right to bear arms. Further, the second element, this so-called disorder list, is a convoluted mess of afflictions that may or may not cause someone to be considered dangerous. Many of the listed disorders also do not impact gun safety at all. For example, some afflictions deal with anxiety disorders, fear of large crowds, or a lack of self-esteem. The list is complex, the list is long, and the list is not designed to regulate firearms. Rather, the list is designed to regulate whether a person can manage his or her beneficiary payments. In other words, can they handle money? But here's the essential question that the federal government is incapable of answering. If they aren't dangerous, why does the Social Security Administration, like the VA, want to take away their guns? The National Council on Disability, a nonpartisan and independent federal agency, has come out against the Social Security Administration's rule and in favor of the repeal that this resolution of disapproval will accomplish. The Council has repeatedly stated its concerns about the agency failing to determine that people are dangerous before reporting their names to the gun ban list. It has been the Council on Disability's, quote, long-held position that restrictions on gun possession and ownership based on psychiatric or intellectual disability must be based on a verifiable concern as to whether the individual poses a heightened risk of danger to themselves or others, end of quote. The Council has also stated that the rule, quote, unnecessarily and unreasonably deprives individuals with disabilities of a constitutional right. It increases the stigma for those who, due to their disability, may need a representative payee, end of quote. Another organization, the Consortium for Individuals with Disabilities, and that's a coalition of 100 national disability groups, shares the same concern about the regulation that we're having this resolution of disapproval about. Quote, The current public dialogue is replete with inaccurate stereotyping of people with mental disabilities as violent and dangerous, and there is a real concern that the kind of policy change encompassed by this rule will reinforce those unfounded assumptions, end of quote. With that being said, even the ACLU wrote a letter in opposition to the agency's regulations, and Madam President, I'd like to enter these letters in the record, as well as other letters from disability groups at the end of my statement.
Without objection.
Simply stated, the agency rule uses a massive regulatory net that captures innocent individuals who should be left alone. Just because a person is assigned a fiduciary does not make that person or those persons dangerous. Whenever the government tries to eliminate fundamental constitutional rights, it is required to narrowly tailor its regulatory actions so that innocent people are not impacted. The Social Security regulation fails in that regard. That is why both the National Council on Disability and the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities have called specifically for using this Congressional Review Act to repeal the final rule. And that's what our introduction of a resolution will accomplish. Constitutional due process is wholly lacking. For example, the agency does not afford a beneficiary a formal hearing before his or her name is reported to the gun ban list. Now think about that. The Second Amendment, which recognizes a fundamental constitutional right, is being simply ripped away without a formal dispute process to initially challenge the action. Instead, the beneficiary must wait until their name is already on the gun ban list, and only then can the beneficiary appeal the decision by grace of the government. Now, this process effectively reverses what should be a burden on the government. The government should not be able to strip a fundamental constitutional right without due process and then place the burden on the citizen to restore it. A hearing should be afforded before the infringement of a fundamental right, not afterwards. And the burden must be on the government to prove its case. Now that simply is the American way, our Constitution's way. The Social Security Administration regulation falsely claims that it requires an adjudication before reporting names to the gun ban list. But there is no hearing afforded to the Social Security recipient before placing a name on the gun ban list. And of course, without a hearing, that process cannot honestly be called an adjudication. In other words, the Social Security Administration is blowing blue smoke when they say that. And without an adjudication, the process violates federal law. Now, here's the kicker. In order for beneficiaries to remove their names from the gun ban list, they have to prove that they are not dangerous. So, guilty until proven innocent. And the burden is on you to prove your innocence. Any way you look at it, that is totally unfair, violation of the Constitution, but common sense ought to tell everybody it's just plain wrong. The federal government under the Obama administration treated Social Security recipients with contempt and disregard when this rule was put out. So with our resolution of disapproval, we can effectively terminate this unconstitutional government regulation which the new Trump administration supports. I encourage all of my colleagues to support our efforts. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.